What's up, guys? Welcome to G-Whiskey. My name's Jeff. Now, this is a channel where I offer my thoughts and opinions on a specific whiskey, and if you stick around to the end, I'll be giving it a score as well. If that sounds interesting, hit subscribe down below. And with that out of the way, why don't we jump into our review? Today, we've got Craigellachie 13-year-old. Stick around. Alright, so we've got a Craigellachie with us today. Craigellachie is one of your lesser-known Speyside distilleries, and as is often the case with these more obscure distilleries, the fans who do appreciate it are pretty passionate about it. Interestingly, this is known as kind of an anti-Speyside Speysider, in the sense that it defies convention. It doesn't have your typical Speyside character or profile. So our 13-year-old here is one of only 3 core range expressions from Craigellachie. Of course, they do have special releases here and there, some odds and ends, but yeah, only 3 members of their core range. So we've got our 13 here, obviously. There's also a 17-year-old, and there's a 23-year-old. Now, as I'm new to this brand, I've actually never bought a bottle of Craigellachie before. I figured I'd start with the 13-year-old as it's their entry-level expression. So a little bit about Craigellachie first. They do have a bit of history to them. They started distilling in 1898. They are currently a Bacardi-owned brand. Bacardi bought it off of Diageo in 1998, and the core range that we have from them now was released in 2014. Now, initially, I don't think it had much hype behind it, but slowly but surely, its reputation has grown. Now, they have always been kind of an obscure distillery, and arguably they still are, but they've been making more noise in whiskey circles over the last few years, I would say. And I can see why. I think there's a few factors at work here that would make this the kind of whiskey that some people would latch onto. To start with, we have this kind of cool, old-timey label. Granted, that look has been trending recently, but it works. It's a bit of a black sheep in terms of its profile. Unlike its sherried, sweet, more approachable Speyside counterparts, this one doesn't really fit the mold of the region. It's known for being a little bit scrappier, and also its general obscurity and the fact that they really tout that they have this craft, old-timey approach to making whiskey, I think adds to its appeal. It definitely makes it feel like an underdog distillery, and people love their underdogs. But tell you what, all of that surface level stuff, I think whiskey lovers like you and I aren't as easily sucked in by all of that noise. The quality of your whiskey better be good, otherwise we're not interested. So why don't we find out about this one? Why don't we hop into a review here, see what it's all about, and in the meantime, if you can kindly leave a like down below, that'd be greatly appreciated. So we've got some okay specs here. This one comes in at a healthy ABV of 46%, and it's also non-chill filtered. Unfortunately, it is a colored whiskey, so maybe not quite as craft as they'd have us believe, but we do have 2 out of 3, so not bad. So I'll show you the color of our whiskey, even though there's no point. It's got E150A in it. For our look, tell you what, a lot of people seem to really enjoy this style of label. And I get it, I can see why. It's got an old-timey craft look to it. Definitely stands out on the shelf. But on the other hand, I mean, they're trying pretty hard with this one, aren't they? But tell you what, I guess I don't mind a try-hard look as long as you can pull it off all right. I think they did fine with this one. So look, presentation score, maybe 3.5 out of 5. They don't mention anything about being non-chill filtered. They should. Of course, they're not going to brag about being a colored whiskey. There is a lot of noise on this label. You know, we do things the old-fashioned way. Distillery built on a rocky blah blah blah. Tell you what, on the back they do mention worm tubs, which not every distillery has. They mention that it adds a weightier, heftier flavor to the whiskey, which is true. Overall, it's a good look. Despite the fact that they're trying pretty hard, I don't mind it. Let's try our nose. So tart, citrusy, fruity. We get some lemon in here, definitely some pineapple, some green mango, some papaya, some apples. There's also some grassy notes in here. There's some butane, Nature Valley Crunch bars, and maybe some herbal notes in here like dill. Now, it's not a pretty nose. It is a little bit sharp, but it's very interesting. It's very characterful. Now the palate. All right, we're gonna start off with an intense, spicy white pepper note in here. It's sharp, but it's not hot. We got caramel, toffee, vanilla pudding, fruit pudding, and kind of like a vegetal salty note, like maybe green olives. And the finish. Okay, We're getting saltier here. We're getting more savory. There's a meatiness to this. So yeah, some meaty notes. Cola. I'm getting like berries or berry turnover, something like that. Tart apple pie. Some charcoal. And maybe some black licorice. This is a medium to long finish with some very nice intensity. Now, I'll admit I've only had this bottle open for a couple of weeks, and just in that time alone, I've seen some pretty big improvements. When I first bought it, I popped it, had a session with it, and I didn't really understand the appeal. It came off spirity, it was hot, and honestly, I didn't feel like it was a well-made whiskey. But I've since come around to it. It's not the same whiskey as it was. I think the trick here is to let it open up a little bit, let it interact with some air. Now, once you get past that initial hurdle, you'll start to see why some people appreciate it. It is a very interesting whiskey, and yes, it's definitely not your typical Speysider. But just because some of that heat subsided doesn't mean that this is an easy whiskey. It certainly isn't. You do have a lot of sharp, prickly, pointed flavors in here. In that sense, I might compare it to something like the Arran Quarter Cask if you've tried that. Decent whiskey, check it out. But yeah, it walks that fine line between hot and sharp. Luckily, it falls more on the side of sharp. Sharp doesn't always work in whiskeys, but luckily it does here. Another similarity to that Arran Quarter Cask would be the Youth, which, of course, Youth makes sense for the Arran. That's a no-age stated whiskey. This one here is going to be 13 years old. You would think that the casks would have sort of rounded out some of those sharper flavors. No, it's still a rugged whiskey. It's still very much spirit-driven. Now, in my recent review of the Kilkerran 12, I mentioned that it's rare these days to find a spirit-driven whiskey that works. And tell you what, we've got one here. We've even got a little bit of funk in here. Now, not quite on the same level as you might find in some other whiskeys, but it's there. I think it adds to the character. It makes it an interesting whiskey, but I will say it's not an easy whiskey to like. It's not a whiskey I would recommend for beginners or people who are just getting started. There are some characteristics in here that make it a little bit challenging. First off, like I said, it's spirity, it's a little bit sharp, it's not a pretty whiskey. Now, depending on your personal taste and level of experience, that can either add or take away from your enjoyment of it. Second, there's that funk that I mentioned. That's not going to be for everyone. And third, this is a whiskey that needs to open up. It takes time to get to know. I've had it open for 2 weeks and I'm still learning new things about it. So you need to spend time with it. So for those reasons, I would say it is one of your more challenging options from Speyside. But personally, a lot of those things work for me. And despite a pretty poor initial reaction to it, I like it now. I think I'm going to score this one an 86. Now, as I mentioned, this is a recommended whiskey for people with a bit more experience under their belt who can appreciate some ruggedness and a touch of sharpness in their whiskey. The best way I might describe this whiskey would be an amalgamation between Springbank 10, Arran Quarter Cask, and maybe throw in a touch of Clynelish 14. Now, it's not really similar to any of those whiskeys. It kind of defies comparison, but yeah, I'm doing my best here. It's definitely a roller coaster of a whiskey. Your nose, your palate, and your finish are all going to be markedly different. Each of them, though, do offer some pretty unique, pretty cool notes. So yeah, I've done a 180 on this whiskey in just a few weeks. Initially, I didn't like it very much. I probably would have scored it something like 81. This was recommended to me by one of my viewers. Thank you, by the way. And at first, when I tried it, I'm like, what is this guy smoking? What does he see in it? But over time, it has grown on me. I've grown to appreciate it, which honestly is a little bit surprising because whiskeys of this style go wrong more often than they go right. This is a temperamental whiskey with some pretty unique flavors, but luckily it does come together into something cohesive if you spend some time with it. But it's also one of those ones where personal taste is going to be a pretty big factor. This is one of those profiles where, regardless of your level of experience, your opinion of it could really go either way. So when I say this whiskey is not for beginners, that doesn't mean that just because you've got a little bit more experience, you're going to enjoy it. I really have no idea how you're going to feel about this one. Personally, I do think it's a really interesting whiskey. I think for an entry-level expression, it's one that takes you for a ride. I think we've got some pretty good value here. Where I live, this falls on the high end of entry-level prices. And despite my initial disappointment, I'm all for this stuff now. In fact, I'm quite curious to try the 17 next, so might be one I'll get around to. But yeah, in the meantime, this 13, yeah, I think it's worth the price. But as I said, you do need to be ready for something different here. Now, you might go out and buy it and absolutely hate me for recommending it to you, or you might love me. Could go either way, but I can tell you, you're probably not going to be bored with it. This is easily one of the more interesting and characterful entry-level expressions out there. Alright, that'll be it for me today, guys. Thank you very much for watching. As always, hit subscribe down below, click that little bell icon, and of course, smash the like. Now, I do want to hear from you. Have you tried Craigellachie 13? What were your thoughts on it? And finally, down in the comments, let me know what you want to see me review next, and I'll keep it in mind for my upcoming videos. Bye guys.